Welcome to Lighten Up, the Art of Living Clutter-Free, a podcast for people who are ready to clear the physical, the mental, and the emotional clutter that's been weighing them down. I'm Melanie Cohen, your host, coach, and guide. Each week, we talk about the clutter you can see and the clutter you can't. The stuff in your home, the noise in your head, the expectations, habits, and unmade decisions that quietly drain your energy. This isn't about perfection or minimalism. It's about creating space for what actually matters in this season of your life. Let's lighten up together, starting now. Welcome back to Lighten Up, the Art of Living Clutter-Free. And sometimes we talk about physical clutter, and sometimes we talk about mental clutter, and sometimes we talk about both because they are so intertwined. And today I have a special guest. It is exactly a year ago since you saw him last on the podcast. I have with me today my husband, now of 31 years, Bill Cohen. Bill Cohen, say hi.
Hello, thanks for having me back.
So last year I had you on to talk about book clutter. And if you all haven't listened to that episode, you need to go back and check it out because the implication isn't that books are bad or that too many books are bad, but rather just a fun conversation about reading, collecting, enjoying, appreciating, looking at, etc., all the things. Today, we are going to talk about a different topic, and that is about being empty nesters. And being an empty nester comes with all different forms of physical and mental clutter. So let's start with something simple. Bill, how does it feel to be an empty nester?
I really enjoy being an empty nester.
How come?
I'm thinking about this because I don't want to get anybody in trouble.
If you say anything that makes your kids look bad, we can contemplate deleting or editing later.
I appreciate having the space, just you and me. Not having to worry about other people. I always talk about what it was like the spring of 2020, how living in a New York City apartment with one bathroom with 3 women was quite challenging for me. One of the reasons I risked life and limb to head to the office, one of the reasons, just because it was such a cramped space. And even though our older daughter moved out later that year, when our younger daughter just moved out in July of 2025, and it really changed the dynamic of the space that we're living in and allowed us to do things with her old space that really brought us some joy. You love working in that space, and I love coming and sitting down on the love seat opposite your workstation and having a conversation with you. It's nice having an additional place where we can chat. Also, I think having one less person in the house makes life simpler in a sense, because from the sense of meal planning, we don't have to worry about, well, I guess I can say her name. What is Shayna going to think about this? She's not going to eat that. Or what are we watching on television? Or what are we just doing in general? I think that the dynamic of her absence from the space gives us a different feel for the place that we're living in.
So I'm going to stop you there because I feel like you just brought up like 4 or 5 different topics that we have to be sure to address during the episode. I was on a Zoom last week and someone was talking about, they were like transitioning from one home to another and they had to be in an apartment, and they were talking about the horror of 4 people and 1 bathroom. And I was like, you know what? That's been my life for the longest time. We moved into the apartment that we're in now 10 years ago. And we moved from a place that had more closets. We moved from a place that had a balcony, sorry, a lanai, and we moved from an apartment that had an extra half bathroom. And we still feel so good about the move we made. The place that we're in now is kept up a little bit better. That, instead of old carpets, we have beautiful hardwood floors. And when we came in, the living room and dining room had this like beautiful caramel color paint on the walls that I love. And the other place, the kitchen was like really old and tacky. This kitchen is just, I don't know, was probably redone in the 90s, so the backsplash isn't, like, the best. But we've been so happy to be over here. First of all, we're so much closer to our friends, the Geigers, and I think this was the right place for us. And that said, so many thoughts. One less half bathroom, the pandemic would have been so much easier if we had that space. I also complain all the time that, like, we didn't have an outdoor space. Like, we know people who had yards and porches and all the things, and that balcony could have been a game changer just in having a space to go to outside. You can't go back in time and change things. This is the place that we live in, and there was a lot of togetherness, and that's sometimes great, and sometimes it's not so great. So the reality is you and I lived together for 4 years before we had Jolie. So we had 4 years of just the 2 of us, right? And then there's 1 baby, there's 2, and there's a lot to be said for having more space. But I wanted to go back to the moving from the old apartment to the new apartment because this apartment's a little bit smaller and has 3 less closets, and the old place, one of the closets was a walk-in. That is a huge difference in storage, and we got rid of so much when we moved. What is amazing to me is despite having gone through that, how much we have let go of in the last 3 years, that this concept of decluttering for a healthier mental and physical life, that we still had so much to let go of. Do you have any thoughts on the move? Maybe you want to say a little bit about how much we struggled on that move.
I think I lost 10 pounds on that move. It was I mean, I between you and me and all your listeners, I had 10 pounds to lose, if not more. But we were moving at a time and we still had a little bit of overlap with the old apartment, but then there was also pressure to get some of that stuff out. But the amount of stuff we left on the curb and had to break down and throw away and prepare for recycling. And then me pushing our belongings after the fact, the stuff that we didn't get to move in time.
You mean the stuff that we didn't have ready when the movers came?
Right, correct. And which that speaks volumes right there about how much stuff we had. And then pushing that in like a little granny cart. People in New York City know what I'm talking about. In February, it was about a mile. Yeah. Trying not to hit bumps in the sidewalk so everything would go spilling out. I think that happened once, but it was an ordeal. And if memory serves, our older daughter was in school in Maryland at the time, so she really wasn't involved in it. And
Well, let me give Jolie a little bit of credit because when she was
right,
home for winter break, she went to see quite a few apartments with me. And while she was home, even though we didn't have something before she went back, well, we did find something before she went back to school, but the crossover was like days. We had her packing. And fortunately, she had a lot of her stuff with her at college, but still necessitated us doing the final packing up in her room. She's not the kid I blame for the challenge of the move, though.
that's a whole other story. So I think that, but going into a new space, it's like fresh start. What can we get rid of? What do we not need in this new space? What has worn out its welcome? What can we part ways with? And knowing that we had fewer closets, there was a necessity. And we couldn't just leave it behind because our old landlords that we still were in touch with, we had a decent relationship with, and we didn't want to stick them with like the need to rent a dumpster and throw everything out in the street. We wanted to do it right, and that necessitated making sure everything out of there properly
Right.
and within a certain time. It got a little dicey at the end there with the overlap, and they wanted to start painting when I still had a couple things that I had to figure out what we were doing with. But that was, I think I'm getting off topic here, but that was part of
It's
the,
okay. I
yeah,
think part of what I'm hearing is how much work goes into moving.
Yes.
And what I'm also hearing is like, that's the greatest opportunity to downsize, get rid of stuff, lovingly let go of things. And I think a lot of people take advantage of that. But I think many more people make the move and then say, why did I take this with me? And the why did I take this with me could be something that happens while they're unpacking, but it could also be something that happens 5 years down the road when they're like, I'm finally going to take care of this, stuff. I'm sure if I asked everyone to post in the comments, do you still have a box or more from your last move? That most people would say, yes, I have a box or more that I haven't addressed since I moved. And we moved a year ago, 5 years ago, a decade ago. That's out there. So, what that means to me is take the time before moving to make as many of the decisions as you possibly can about what you want to hang on to and love or what you want to lovingly let go of, because that makes it easier when it's time to unpack and find the perfect home for things. And we did that. We just didn't realize how much we still had. And I think Shayna moving out last summer meant I got my own office. We were trading. Sometimes you worked in the dining room. Sometimes I was in the office, which had been Jolie's room, and sometimes vice versa. And sometimes you were in the city. And there were a few times you worked in the kitchen. And we now both have our own spaces.
Correct.
So I've had so many people come into the office and say how beautiful it is. And I love everything that I've done with it. And how many people are shocked by how big the room is. Because anytime they peeked into Shayna's room, it was just full of stuff and stuff was everywhere. We're not making judgment. So many people have kids who just don't care. And that's fine. We just like keep your door closed. But now I love having the door open. I love people coming in and seeing my purple walls and my purple couch and the Hunter Wasser I had been hanging on to, waiting to frame and having a place for it. It couldn't look more perfect there. And it couldn't look more perfect than next to this lamp that I got for free on Buy Nothing. So I love showing this space off. And there are times that I miss having the girls around. It feels so good when they come over for dinner or to watch Survivor or, running errands. They swing by, and it is a reminder that we loved living with them. Like I don't want anybody to think that like we could not wait to kick them out. And in some respects, we did, if for no other reason, they're now living their lives and
Sure.
enjoying where they are and what they're doing. And, and for Jolie, she's living with one of her dearest friends. And for Shayna, moving in with her girlfriend, Emily, means that they've taken that next step in their lives and are enjoying it. And as we like to joke, she's Emily's problem now. So I know there are so many people who are weepy when the kids leave. And I suspect in many of those cases are potentially parents who had been stay at home and their only responsibility was to raising amazing kids. I don't mean only, I mean their responsibility was raising children. And that it can be potentially harder because they were a part of your everyday, all day, not all day, but you know what I mean, versus someone who had to work full time like I did. And I made it to some games, but because of the odd, schedule that I held when I was at Weight Watchers, I missed games. There were lots of shows and rehearsals, and I didn't get to as many rehearsals. And so they were a part of their lives that I missed, but that's probably also what made it easier to let them go when it was time for them to move.
Yeah, I think it should be worth noting that both you and I had very different experiences than our kids did. And part of it is generational. A lot more kids are staying at home now than they did in the past. But when I graduated from college, when you left college, we went on our own. I couldn't have the option to stay, like, live at home because I had younger siblings who were in school with my dad and my stepmom. And I was like sleeping on the top bunk of a bunk bed in my little brother's room.
With your 5-year-old or maybe by that time when you graduated college, maybe he was 6.
6, right. So that was not even, didn't even enter a thought. And I wasn't going to go back to Hawaii to live with my mom and my stepdad because I would have had to have left you behind, and that was not something I was willing to do,
That
and
was not an option.
not an option. And so, living at home as an adult with your parents to us is an alien concept. I mean, we understand what it means, but we didn't experience that. So we
Right.
didn't have the experience of I would sometimes feel like, well, I saw what it was like when I would come home from during summers while I was in college and stay and sleeping on the top bunk with my 4-year-old brother or whatnot, and not really having any space of my own. And so it didn't make sense.
And that wouldn't have occurred to you unless it was like between places that you would stay there. And I talk about this a lot. I had no home to go home to. My parents at that point had split up. My dad was in Florida in recovery, living with my grandparents, and my mom moved out into this tiny little space with as much stuff as she could bring from a home that I grew up in that was like 3 times, if not 4 times the size of the apartment she was in Carroll Gardens. And so it never occurred to me that going home was an option because my childhood home was gone.
Right.
And I know I'm not the only one in that situation, but the thing is that I couldn't go to where my parents had gone because they were not back. Neither of them were back on their feet for a long time after that happened.
Right.
And so, um, it doesn't mean that it wouldn't have been an option for our daughters to stay at home, but I think you and I, after a while, just thought it was weird. But I also understand it is so expensive everywhere, everywhere.
Yes.
Incredibly expensive in New York and incredibly expensive in New York for young people, which, is why so many are so deeply in like the gig or what do they call it?
The gig economy, right?
Yeah, but like Jolie has like 3 different jobs and she can come back and comment if she's not happy to be running all over the place and have these different experiences working with different people in different ways. And I'm not sure I would have had that in me. Did I work full time? Sure. Did I have jobs where I was working well over 40 hours a week? Sure. Did I have a job? I mean, listen, when the girls were little, I was traveling regularly out of state and I was fortunate to have someone in you that was fully invested and didn't see it as babysitting his kids, but rather taking on the parental duties alone when I traveled. And so that made, so many of those things possible. But just to get back to like the concept of empty nesting, I wish there was another way to call it, but everybody calls it empty nesting because you hear the word empty and it sounds like it's something that is lacking or not enough or needs to be filled up, when in fact, I don't think that that's the best way to describe what happens when when your kids, fly the fly the coop. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we did have 1 year when both of the girls were in school, and it was an
9
empty
months,
nest
you mean?
year. Sure, felt like a year. It was very enjoyable, and, that was like a preview of what it would be like to just, be together and not have to worry about who's doing what, are they getting along, that obviously didn't have it be much of an issue once they got to be adults. The That was like a little bit of a test, a little bit of a glimpse into, "Oh, this is what the future is going to look like." And I remembered as being a lot of fun, but it also flew by. And for their stuff was still here, right? So it wasn't like they were really gone. We were still living with their stuff. So I think now that we are truly like Shayna doesn't have anything here. Jolie has some stuff still kicking around in the
They
office
both
here.
have they both have, like, books and stuff here. Shayna would say that they're not hers, and Jolie would say, "Come on, you have more space than I do." It is exactly what she says. When I'm like, "But there are still playbills and books here that belong to you." "Oh, but you have more room." And we were at her apartment yesterday, right?
Right,
And she
right,
has a lot of books. And her three-bedroom apartment is smaller, and she shares it with two other adults. They have common spaces that they share,
right.
which is not like I wouldn't look at our adult apartment and call them common spaces. It is just our home. And I feel like our home definitely has a different energy, but then it also comes with its challenges. We have three cats. And when we went away, when Shayna still lived at home, there was never a question of who would take care of the cats when we were away. And then when we went to your sister's wedding in 2023, my mom came and took care of the cats,
Right.
which was great. And then last summer, we did a long weekend, and I think Shayna was also out of town at the same time. And mom used to love to come here and be with the cats. Our space is bigger than hers. I think our bed is newer than hers, so it's more comfortable. The kitchen is bigger and more operational. So, mom doesn't have cats and she loves cats. But it means that we can't just count on someone to take care of the cats. We have to make arrangements. And for those with dogs, cats, it doesn't matter. This is the thing you have to think about. Or, for people who have lots of plants that need, regular care, these were things that we took for granted.
And I think there's one kind of new concept that has kind of entered the lexicon here. That's the right way of putting it. Is that now that it's just the two of us, if one of us goes away, for example, earlier in last year, I was gone for 3 weeks to spend time with my mom in Hawaii. I knew that at least you had somebody that was here living with you that, and so you were going to be okay. If you needed help with something, Shayna could help.
Big
Now,
girl.
huh? I know you're a big girl.
Big girl. But you make a really good point because you've had to go to Hawaii a few times in the last few years because your mom had not been well. And the last time it was just taking care of business when you were there. But I did have a little buddy in the house, even for when you would go on a business trip for like a night or two. I still had Shayna. I had someone to watch TV with. We
Right,
watched shows together that you weren't interested in. And now it's just me. And
right,
in many ways, I do appreciate that because guess what? I have never lived by myself. I lived with my parents, and then I lived in a dorm room with Terry, and then I lived in a dorm room with Liz. And then I lived at the Zeta house with 9 other people. I could rattle the names. I don't think it's important. And then I worked at the resort where I shared a room with Laura. And then I was a nanny for the Angelinis. And then I was a nanny for the Hunters. And then you and I moved in together. And so I have never lived by myself. And it's not like would be afraid to live by myself. I can't imagine at this point in my life. As someone who's so independent, as someone who really craves her alone time, I think only children crave aloneness in a way that other people don't. And I've heard people with siblings say, "No, you don't understand because, you always had other people around you." And it's different though. It is
yeah, I agree.
so, so different being an only child and craving space. I craved people too. I was always sleeping over at other people's houses or people were sleeping over at my house. It was rarely a weekend where, I didn't have a sleepover with someone all the way through high school. And so there's something to be said for having people present.
Correct.
Um, yeah, and so the same, when I travel, I'm gonna be leaving you here all by yourself. I'm going away for over a week in June.
Wait, what?
What will you do with yourself when your beautiful bride isn't there?
I'll watch a bunch of shows that I know you don't wanna watch.
Fair. What is that? Or am I putting you on the spot? Well, I'm putting you on the spot. You're like, "I don't know what shows they are. I'll figure it out later."
Oh, maybe I'll catch up on some old Pokemon series.
You can do that when I'm away.
Well, like, you don't like generally speaking, you don't like animated film, and I think that sometimes I don't get to watch as much animated film.
Let that out. That makes me sound like I'm whatever.
You've
Anyway,
watched animated films and enjoyed them. I'm just saying that generally that's not your go-to.
I don't choose. Right.
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 You do not
God
judge
forbid. I
people who
wanna
like
watch a doc.
animated films.
Right. And I love documentaries, and there are people who hate documentary. Well, I don't hate animated films. Some of my
Right.
favorite films have been animated, but it's not what I choose. When I have grandchildren, I will be so happy to take them to the movies and watch stuff with them, for the record,
Okay.
whenever it is that that happens. Okay, I wanna talk about clutter, okay?
Okay.
So I wanna talk about physical clutter a little bit more, and then I wanna talk about mental and emotional clutter. So I think one is there's this assumption they move out, and then you have all this extra space. So one of 2 things can happen. One is you're able to spread out, and this space feels, more help me out here.
The space feels
I don't
more
wanna say space
dynamic.
or
Is that a good word?
no, that may be true. That's not what I was looking for. It just there's more space, even though
There's more
there isn't
breathing
more
room.
space.
There's
It just feels
more
there's
yeah,
more there you go. There's more breathing room, it's airier, things look nicer because they're not all jumbled in and on top of each other, and I think for a lot of people, the space empties out and it just gets filled back up, and you and I were clear that that's not something that we wanted to have happen.
right.
And right, okay, so that's another concept of clutter. There are several concepts of clutter. One is it's our calendars. Like in the past, Shayna, what are you doing today? And where are you working today? Because both of our kids, work more than one job. When will you be home?
Right.
Are you going to be home for dinner? Their calendar becomes, important. And so there's less worry around that. I don't want to say worry, but there's less
But and more complex
navigating.
and more complexity. Sorry to talk
Right.
over you there, but that was always the thing. And how often did we like message her, Shayna, and say, "Hey, when are you going to be home? It's on the calendar." And so, but I think, well, we still want to know
Not
so that
always.
we not always. And it's just that even though they're adults, we're still their parents, and we still want to oversee what's going on and making sure everything is okay.
Well, as long as
And
you live in my house. Oh,
yeah, and you know what? We're curious individuals. We want to know what's going on, so we ask questions.
right.
And there's nothing that
Because we care.
kids like more or less than their parents asking them, "What are you doing? What's going on?" It's like
And we could
they
do the
often
Gen X thing. We could do the
right,
Gen X thing and be like, we could call her and text her and say, "When are you getting home?" My parents didn't know where I was.
right, yeah,
I mean, I would tell them where I was. That doesn't always mean that's where I was.
right.
Yeah, it makes for a completely different dynamic. But I also want to talk about the like a mental and emotional clutter. Sometimes it is very obvious what kind of limiting beliefs may get in the way of us being able to accomplish great things. And what do I say? That the mental clutter are the voices in our head, the things that are like on constant loop, over and over and over again, the things that stress us out, which, can include tasks that have to be done, people that we have to call, things that have to be done, and then the emotional clutter, all the feelings associated with everything. And I think one of the things is I know someone else who became an empty nester around the same time that we did, and she was depressed.
Oh,
And I almost felt badly, not for her, but I almost felt badly because she's going to judge me because I'm happy that we're becoming empty nesters. Not happy that our kids weren't home, but happy that we had this new opportunity. And so I think that there are a lot of social norms that people are concerned when they don't fit into. And I think that was one of those, mom is supposed to be sad when the kids move out as opposed to happy. And I don't mean happy because like we were kicking them out, but just happy for the next step as opposed to sad for the next step. Does that make sense?
it does. And kind of my brain is kind of churning here because I was thinking about all these different types of facets of clutter that occur when you live with someone. And look, and I'm going to put Shayna on the spot here. but I will own the fact that she is much like me. She's very emotional. She's very empathetic. When I say she's very emotional, she feels things and things upset her that are upsetting. And there are times when she would come home and you and I would be watching a TV show or eating dinner or whatever. And she would come home and she would need to unload and express what her day had been like. I mean, fine, that's part of being a family. How was your day? That's the social contract living with people, is that you are involved in their lives and you know what's going on. And we want to know what's going on. But there were times when it was a lot. Kind of had to kind of put everything else on hold to absorb and, be the empathetic person listening to what kind of day they had and give advice and all that stuff that's part of parenting and also being in a shared space with someone. And to remove one person from that equation, it declutters the conversation, if you will, when it comes to that. I think that's something that is part of being an empty nester that makes it a little more simple, is that we can still have conversations. Like, we get together with the kids and find out what's going on, hear what's happening, get up to speed, but
We
the con
also we also get phone calls and
right.
text messages and
Yeah, no,
DMs with
it's not like we're not
questions.
in
It's
in
not like,
contact with them, right.
or not that we're not in contact with them, but it's not like we're not being parents. We're just the parenting dynamic shifts.
Right. We don't get the daily play-by-play with all the emotions and all the feelings and all the nitty-gritty details. We get the recaps when we see them,
Right.
or the abridged version in the text message, as opposed to, you know,
Right.
having that person in their space. And I'm not poo-pooing it and
We could
saying,
hold on one sec. But hold on one second. We could say the same for each other. Like, how
right,
many times have
sure,
I walked into your office because I had to talk to you about something and you're on a call and I'm like,
right,
or, you come back to, my office is right outside the bathroom and you come back for the bathroom and peek in and I'm in the middle of a meeting.
right.
And it's not that those things weren't happening before, but I feel like because we're really the only ones that interrupt each other, I'm more conscious of how many times a day that could actually happen. And I don't want to go back to working in an office. Although one of the things I've talked about on the show also is that I've never had a traditional office job. Never. And I am 56 years old. So I've been working for over 35 years. I went from being a nanny. I worked in retail management. I worked for a vendor where I had I had an office at home, and then I was in retail stores all the time. And then I worked for Weight Watchers. And while there were periods of time where I had home work to do from home, I was predominantly out in the field. And now I work for myself and I have an office. But I would never want to go to have the experience for the first time working in an office with shared cubes or shared offices or whatever. Like, I wouldn't even know how to operate in that environment without people wanting me dead. I don't think I could
Well, I
do
mean,
it.
that's a
And
little extreme.
okay, fair. Well, they want her to shut up. But you also currently have a similar experience in that sometimes you're at home, sometimes you're working in the city, every once in a while you're out in Jersey, which is where your project is, I think. So we both have to figure out how to make this space work for the both of us.
Right. It's a lot easier not having that third person in the home has simplified our work processes, because before, like you
Right.
mentioned earlier, at some point it switched. I remember you were always in this room and I was always at the dining room table. And then at some point it switched. And that was when Shayna was still
Switched when
living
I
with us.
It switched when I started the podcast. Do you not remember that?
I
You
think it
don't?
switched before that. I think it switched before
Okay,
that.
but it was a considerable switch when I started the podcast because I needed a space where I can close the door and record.
Right.
And right, so I needed that space.
Right. But there were times when it was problematic and we had to, and we would have to look at, like, I had to look at my work calendar and, like, okay, how many Zoom meetings do I have today? Oh, maybe it's better off if I go to the office because then I have, and for those watching, listening, my work environment when I go to the office is not what you would anticipate. My company has office space downtown in the financial district, but only uses one floor for the most part. And I'm on a floor that they don't use, but they keep the space. And so when I go in, I potentially could see nobody all day unless I physically go to another floor to uh, interact with people. So it's not like I'm going into the hustle and bustle of a busy office when I do that, but I go into a space that is more, it's a larger space that I can sit in. The chair is more comfortable and the view is sometimes better. So anyway, I don't know where I was going with that. You can edit
You
that out.
also don't have the noise of, like, noisy neighbors and all that kinda stuff. Okay. So
True.
I actually do I actually do wanna go back to physical clutter for a moment
Okay.
because as you were talking about how that had been a shared space, and I'm looking at it now, and some of it is the same, some of it's different. We got new bookshelves from Buy Nothing, and everybody thinks they're fantastic. And I took some pictures from that room with me, and then we've added new ones in. We moved some stuff around. But your office is the one you can see from the couch. And my spot on the couch, everybody has a spot, right? My spot on the couch is on the left side. So I am right in front of the office. And the goal of us having separate offices is that our stuff was going to separate and it was going to clean the office out. And that happened a little bit. And it is a reminder when I'm like, oh my God, the office is a mess. It's not my office. So, in some ways, I can't complain. But it's also what I see, and it's what people see when they come over. And so, it is a reminder that all of the scientific research around clutter shows that women, their stress cortisol levels raise higher and with more frequency than men when faced with clutter. And so that isn't to say that men are slobs. I am not saying that men are slobs. What I'm saying is that they either have this ability to see past the clutter or the clutter doesn't affect them in the same way. And when I talk about physical clutter, I talk about it being visual noise. And so it's more noise in our head along with all the other noise in our head. So, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I tend to agree, and again, it depends on the person, but I tend to relate to the fact that I don't feel that physical clutter affects me in the same way that it affects you. But I mean, that's also what you do, right? Is that you work with people to help them with their clutter.
Fair. And what I want to say about that is I had issues with clutter before, and it
Right.
wasn't until, the last 5 to 10 years that I realized what clutter did to me, whether it was going into one of my parents' homes, going to other people's homes that may have been more cluttered, or when I was working for Weight Watchers, going into a space that wasn't, organized. And let me be clear, I am not an organizer, I'm a declutterer. And so for me, it is about letting go of enough clutter that we're not constantly having to reorganize things. And can I organize my stuff? I can. If someone wants me to help them in getting organized, I can guide them, but that's not my zone of genius. My zone of genius is addressing what is the energy in our things that are making us hold on to them, and how is that hurting us, and how do we lovingly let go of things, physical, digital, calendar, people, mental, how do we let that go to make, a happier and a healthier environment? So I and how I feel about the clutter. We don't have a perfectly clean, organized, clutter-free home. Like, everyone has their threshold. And so we talk all the time about how I have no desire to be a minimalist because I love things. I love the paintings on my walls. I love the gazillion photographs that we have in the dining room. I love the pictures on the refrigerator. I love our books. I love our china collection. And so that what we have may be more than someone else. But what I also know is any more than what we have right now is exactly where I start losing my mind. And I feel it physically. I feel it physically.
Right. I'm not that passionate about it, but I'm also I always joke that you could put me anywhere and I could adapt to it and be
And
like,
you
"Oh,"
can. This is true.
but that's just how I'm wired. Is it because how I was raised, where I grew up in I lived one place for 9 months of the year and then 3 months in the summer on the continent away from Hawaii. Um, that I had a couple years in college. I lived in a single and didn't have to share. Well, actually, my freshman year roommate moved out, so I had like halfway through the year. So like I had a single for most of my freshman year. So and I didn't have, but I truly believe that I'm so much better at dealing with my stuff than I have been in the past. And I could even say that better than a year ago, better than, I mean, today, I mean, it's always a battle, right? You can tell this to anybody. Today, I went through one of my t-shirt drawers. Notice I say one of my t-shirt drawers because I have two t-shirt drawers. And I really struggled with like, okay, do I keep this? What do I do with this? And I parted ways with a few t-shirts that I like, but I'm like, they're too small. They don't fit me right. When's the last time I wore this? And they're in a bag for donation now. And when I remember being so
Bill?
excited when I got these shirts. I know we're off topic.
No, no, no. This isn't off topic because we're talking about
Okay.
clutter. And if someone goes back to the episode that I did, I don't remember what the episode is. I'll put it in the show notes under resources. But I showed a photograph of my t-shirt drawer, and I showed it for multiple reasons. One, I love how it's organized. It makes it so easy. And it's like the only time I will credit Marie Kondo. She's the one that put that in my head. So it's easier to stay organized, but it's the one place where I've said, you know what? I have more than I need. I have more than I need, but I also have the space to store it without it being crazy. And there are things that they rotate. I wear the same thing. It comes back and then there are things that are in the middle of the stacks that I know I haven't worn in a really long time, but I'm not quite ready to let go of yet. So every once in a while, you and I go through our closets and when we do those, like, when is the last time I wore this? Does it fit? Is it in good condition? Could someone else use it more? Could I make money on it? Is it time to let it go? And sometimes that happens post having purchased things. Like you said, so today you went through the shirts and you got rid of a bunch. But how many new ones have come in the last few months?
Not that many.
I think more aloha and dress shirts have come in
Yeah,
recently.
no,
Didn't
that's
you
for
get a
the
t-shirt last week?
Did I get a t-shirt last week? 2
I
weeks
thought you
ago?
did.
No, you didn't let
We
me
were
get that
thrifting
t-shirt
last weekend.
because it didn't fit and it had stains on it. But I mean, that's thank you for,
My
by the
God,
way.
how horrible. If it didn't fit, that'd be a no. If it had stains on it, it would be a no. If it
But
has
it was from
stains
my
and it
favorite
doesn't
brewery.
fit, I don't care. So we'll go to your favorite brewery and get more shirts.
No, 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 I already have enough shirts from breweries.
I'm
It's
so happy to
true.
hear you admit it. Do you have more than enough beer glasses from breweries?
I think there's a bad connection. Weren't we supposed to be talking about empty nesting?
And how about and how and how about
What is this?
bandanas from breweries?
I don't know, man. This subject matter is it's making me break into a sweat.
Okay. Okay. We digress. I'm sure there are aspects of physical and mental clutter that we're not addressing with respect to empty nesting. And I think there are people out there like, oh, you're really stretching. You're trying to figure out a way to implement clutter into every episode. But the reality is that we have so much mess in our heads from so much around us, whether it's the 24-hour news cycle or social media or people or our calendars that are full of those things I just mentioned, that there's no way that anyone exists on this planet without some kind of mental clutter that is frustrating. And on a low level. And a lot of physical and mental clutter can paralyze us from getting anything done. And so I think it really pays to think about what is your mental and emotional clutter, so it's something that you can sit back, journal on it, find an expert like me to talk through it, have someone come to your home and let go of the physical clutter. Make the conscious decision that it's not like, like we always talk about, like in the back of my head, there's a lot that don't make it to the back of the head. It's in the forefront because we can't get it to the back because it's just a constant visual noise. And there are some things in the back that we got to clear out, but there's no room for it because we're navigating so much other clutter. So I think that every aspect of our lives either is an opportunity to clutter our heads or an opportunity to declutter them. And I am so happy for our kids living their lives. There are times where we find photographs or we find videos and we're reminded how cute they were, how fun they were.
They're still cute and fun.
I don't
They're
know
still
that those are
fun.
the words I would use. They're still fun. They're beautiful and they're fun and they're amazing and they're smart and they're incredibly hardworking and they're talented and they're good people. Like they give so much good. They care about people and they care about animals and they care about the planet and they care about all the things that we had hoped we had instilled into them when they were kids. And so, as much as this episode is about the emptiness or the space that they left, it is also about celebrating the people that they are. Because I know there are people who have kids living at home because their kids can't find a job, can't hold a job, aren't good with money, can't afford to pay the rent. And we raised kids that are, they're doing great things in the world.
Yeah.
Any last words on clutter or empty nesting or something that you think that we left out?
I mean, one of the things that I think it goes without saying, but I should probably say it, is that when, you live with people, whether you have one roommate, two roommates, a spouse and kids, whatever, you're negotiating relationships with them on a regular basis and vice versa. They're negotiating relationships with you. So there's mental energy that goes into that because you want to have conversations with them that are meaningful. You want to be respectful of them. You want to, be a cohabitant with them in a way that causes, make sure there's peace and harmony in the home. And
Right.
whether it's intentional or subconscious, it takes energy and mental thought and caring and being empathetic and, being respectful of one another's space, boundaries, feelings, et cetera, et cetera. So when you remove one person or two people or you become an empty nester, there's a simplification of your life from that perspective. It's challenging sometimes because now you don't have a buffer. Like if you get in trouble with somebody, you can't go hide and let the other person in the house deal with the other person. But that simplification really kind of, I think, improves communication or it can improve communication if you're doing it right, because there's like nowhere to hide almost. That's one way of saying it.
Right.
And so it's a simplicity of an environment that I think is wonderful. And you can also think about, all the stuff that's missing now that your kids have flown the coop, but you still have those relationships hopefully outside of the home, but it's just that it becomes a simpler abode and a simpler place to live from that perspective, at least in my opinion.
Yeah. I appreciate you saying that. And I think that's a good place to stop. Thanks for being here today, Billy.
Thanks for having me back.
Thank you for listening to Lighten Up the Art of Living Clutter-Free. If this episode resonated, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who could use just a little bit of lightness. If you're ready for deeper support, you can work with me one-on-one or join my Lighten Up Clutter-Free Mindset Group program. You can find all the details at my website, thoughtfullycoaching.com. Until next time, progress over perfection. Messy action is better than no action at all. So let's lighten up.